The country club's ballroom buzzed with polite conversation as Dad's colleagues mingled around cocktail tables decorated with navy and gold, his favorite colors, though he'd never admit to having favorites. 37 years at Henderson and Associates deserved a proper send-off. Mom had insisted, which meant renting the most expensive venue in town and inviting everyone who mattered in Dad's professional world. I stood near the back, nursing a club soda and watching Mom work the room like the seasoned corporate wife she'd perfected herself into being. Her silver hair was styled in that expensive way that looked effortless, but cost more than most people's monthly rent, and her navy cocktail dress probably cost more than my entire wardrobe, or what she thought my wardrobe was worth. Victoria. Dad's booming voice cut through the chatter as he approached with his longtime partner, Mr. Henderson himself. Come meet the man who's been putting up with me all these years. Mr. Henderson extended a weathered hand, his eyes crinkling with genuine warmth. Your father never stops talking about you. Says you're doing something with computers? Before I could answer, Mom appeared at Dad's elbow like she'd been summoned. Oh, Victoria's still figuring herself out, she said with that practiced smile that never reached her eyes. Living in that little apartment downtown, spending all day staring at screens. We keep hoping she'll find something more substantial. The way she said substantial made it sound like I was playing video games all day instead of running a multi-billion-dollar tech empire. But that was Mom. If it didn't involve a corner office in a traditional company or a husband with the right pedigree, it wasn't real success in her world. Actually, I started, but Mom was already steering the conversation elsewhere. Harold was just telling me about his grandson's internship at Goldman Sachs, she continued, as if I hadn't spoken. Now that's the kind of opportunity that leads somewhere meaningful. I'd learned long ago not to argue with Mom at social functions. The last time I tried to explain what I actually did for work, she laughed and patted my arm like I was telling her about an imaginary friend. So I just smiled and nodded, while she painted me as the family disappointment to anyone who'd listen. The truth was more complicated than Mom could comprehend. While she thought I was wasting away in my little apartment, which was actually a penthouse I owned outright, I'd spent the last 8 years building quantum dynamics from the ground up. We specialized in quantum computing applications for financial modeling, and our algorithms had revolutionized how major investment firms processed market data. But explaining quantum computing to someone who still called everything technology-related computer stuff was like trying to explain color to someone who'd never seen. So I'd stopped trying. Victoria, darling. Mom's voice had that particular pitch she used when she was about to say something she thought was helpful, but was actually devastating. Mrs. Patterson was just mentioning that her daughter's law firm is hiring paralegals. I told her you'd be interested. It's a real job with benefits and everything. Mrs. Patterson, a thin woman with kind eyes and unfortunate lipstick choices, looked embarrassed. I'm sure Victoria has her own plans, Margaret. Oh, she's been saying that for years. Mom laughed, that tinkling sound she perfected for social situations. But eventually we all have to face reality, don't we? The reality was that I'd been supporting myself since college and had never asked my parents for a dime. The reality was that my computer stuff had generated more revenue last quarter than Dad would make in his entire career. The reality was that I deliberately kept my success hidden because I knew it would change everything, and I wasn't ready for that conversation. But Mom didn't know any of that. To her, I was still the weird kid who preferred programming to piano lessons, who chose MIT over the local university because it was more practical, who turned down perfectly good job offers at respectable companies to chase some impossible dream. She spends all her time on computers. Mom continued to Mrs. Patterson, as if I wasn't standing right there. I keep telling her that's no way to build a real career. You can't make a living playing around with gadgets. The irony was so thick I could have cut it with a knife. Just last week, I'd closed a deal with a consortium of European banks that would integrate our quantum algorithms into their trading platforms. The contract was worth $800 million over 3 years. My gadgets were reshaping global finance, but Mom saw only the surface, her daughter who dressed casually and didn't work in a proper office. Well, Mrs. Patterson said diplomatically, I'm sure she's doing important work. Important? Mom's eyebrows rose in that expression I knew meant she was about to say something particularly cutting. Sweetie, sitting in front of a computer all day isn't important. It's just killing time until she figures out what she really wants to do with her life. I felt the familiar burn of frustration in my chest, the same feeling I'd had since childhood when Mom dismissed anything that didn't fit her narrow definition of success. Part of me wanted to pull up my company's latest financial reports on my phone and show her exactly how unimportant my work was. But I knew it wouldn't matter. Mom's worldview was carved in stone. Real success meant climbing someone else's corporate ladder, preferably while wearing a suit and sitting in meetings all day. The evening progressed with more of the same. Dad's colleagues were genuinely interesting people with fascinating stories about their cases and clients. But every conversation somehow circled back to Mom's helpful suggestions about my career prospects. She recommended secretarial positions, entry-level marketing roles, and administrative assistant jobs with the enthusiasm of someone convinced she was solving my life's greatest problem. Margaret tells me you're looking for work, said Dr. Williams, Dad's golf partner. My practice is expanding. We could use someone to handle our computer systems. She'd be perfect for that. Mom jumped in before I could respond. Victoria's always been good with computer things. It would be nice for her to use those skills for something practical. Practical. There was that word again. As if developing algorithms that could process millions of financial transactions in seconds was somehow less practical than fixing someone's email password. I appreciate the thought, I said carefully, but I'm actually working on some projects that keep me pretty busy. Projects. Mom repeated with air quotes, turning to Dr. Williams. She calls them projects. I call them pipe dreams. The casual cruelty of it hit me like a physical blow. This was my mother, the woman who'd raised me, who'd claimed to want the best for me, and she was literally advertising my supposed failures to a room full of strangers. Not because she was malicious, but because she genuinely believed she was being helpful by managing expectations and finding me realistic opportunities. By 8 o'clock, I was ready to leave. Mom had successfully convinced half the room that I was a charity case in need of intervention, and the other half were looking at me with that mixture of pity and confusion that came from trying to reconcile Mom's description with the confident, articulate woman standing before them. But then Mayor Davidson stepped up to the small podium that had been set up near the front of the room. Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention for just a moment. The room gradually quieted as conversations died down and people turned toward the front. Dad looked surprised. This hadn't been part of the planned program. I'm here tonight not just to honor Harold Hayes' remarkable career, Mayor Davidson continued, but to make a very exciting announcement about our city's future. I felt a familiar flutter of nerves in my stomach. 2 months ago, I'd had a series of meetings with city planning officials about a project I'd been developing. After years of building my company, I'd wanted to give back to the community that raised me, especially in the technology sector where we were lagging behind other cities our size. As many of you know, our city has been working to attract technology companies and create more opportunities for young people to build careers in innovation and entrepreneurship, the mayor said. Today, I'm thrilled to announce that we've received the largest single donation in our city's history. Mom straightened beside me, probably assuming this was about some wealthy client of Dad's. She loved being adjacent to important announcements, even when they had nothing to do with her. A visionary entrepreneur has donated $50 million to build a state-of-the-art technology center that will serve as an incubator for startups, a training facility for emerging technologies, and a research hub for quantum computing applications. My heart started beating faster. I'd kept the donation anonymous during the planning stages, but I'd known this moment would come eventually. This incredible gift will transform our city's economic landscape and provide opportunities for countless young innovators. Mayor Davidson continued. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored to publicly thank Victoria Hayes for her extraordinary generosity. The room went dead silent. I heard Mom's wine glass hit the floor and shatter, the crystal fragments scattering across the polished marble like diamonds catching the light. The sound seemed to echo in the sudden vacuum of silence that followed the mayor's words. Every head in the room turned toward me. Dad's mouth was hanging open. Mr. Henderson looked like someone had just told him the sky was green. Mrs. Patterson's kind eyes were wide with shock. But it was Mom's face that captured my attention. The carefully constructed mask of social perfection had completely crumbled, leaving behind raw confusion and something that might have been horror. This wasn't part of her script. This didn't fit anywhere in her understanding of who I was supposed to be. Victoria? Dad's voice was barely a whisper. Are you? $50 million? Mom's voice cracked on the words. Victoria, what is he talking about? Mayor Davidson continued, apparently oblivious to the family drama unfolding in the back of the room. The Victoria Hayes Technology Center will break ground next month and should be operational within 2 years. Ms. Hayes' company, Quantum Dynamics, has also committed to establishing their headquarters here, bringing an estimated 500 high-tech jobs to our community. That detail hit the room like a second bombshell. These weren't just Dad's colleagues anymore. They were city residents who understood exactly what 500 high-paying tech jobs meant for the local economy. The woman Mom had been describing as a jobless dreamer had just announced plans to become one of the city's largest employers. Her company, Mom whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. She has a company. I took a deep breath, feeling like I was standing at the edge of a cliff. For 8 years, I'd maintained the fiction that I was just getting by, just figuring things out, just playing around with computers. For 8 years, I'd let Mom's disappointment wash over me, rather than risk the complicated conversations that would come with revealing the truth. But there was no going back now. Mom, I said quietly, I need to tell you some things. The crowd had started to disperse, with people clustering around the mayor and others clearly trying to get closer to me. But my family stood frozen in our little bubble of shock, like the last people to learn that the world had changed while they weren't paying attention. Victoria, Dad said slowly, his lawyer's mind apparently starting to process the implications. When he said your company, how big is your company? It was a fair question. Quantum Dynamics had grown so far beyond my original projections that sometimes I couldn't quite believe it myself. We had offices in 12 cities, partnerships with 43 major financial institutions, and a valuation that put us in the upper tier of private tech companies. Last quarter, we generated about $2.3 billion in revenue, I said simply. Mom made a sound like she was choking. Billion? Dad repeated. With a B? The donation is just part of our community investment initiative, I continued. We're also funding scholarships for local students interested in STEM fields, and we're partnering with the high school to upgrade their computer science program. But Mom was struggling to form complete sentences. But you live in that tiny apartment. You dress like. You said you were just. I said I was working on projects. I corrected gently. You assumed they weren't important. The truth was, I did live simply compared to what I could afford. My penthouse was nice, but not ostentatious. I drove a reliable car instead of something flashy, and I preferred comfortable clothes to designer labels. The money had never been the point. Solving interesting problems was the point. Building something meaningful was the point. But I could see that from Mom's perspective. My lifestyle choices had been evidence of failure rather than personal preference. Quantum computing, Mr. Henderson said thoughtfully, and I was grateful for his interruption. That's the technology that could revolutionize financial modeling, isn't it? Among other applications, yes. I nodded. We've developed algorithms that can process complex market scenarios thousands of times faster than traditional computers. And banks pay you for this? Dad asked, his professional curiosity starting to override his shock. Banks, investment firms, insurance companies, government agencies, I confirmed. Anyone who needs to analyze large datasets or model complex scenarios. Mayor Davidson had finished his remarks and was making his way toward us, followed by a small crowd of people who apparently wanted to meet the mysterious benefactor. I could see Mom's social training warring with her confusion. Part of her wanted to bask in the reflected glory of having raised the evening's guest of honor, but part of her was still trying to reconcile this new information with everything she believed about me. Ms. Hayes, the mayor said warmly as he reached us, I hope you don't mind that I revealed your identity. I know you wanted to keep the donation anonymous initially, but the city council felt it was important to publicly acknowledge such extraordinary generosity. Of course, I replied. I'm honored that the city is excited about the project. Your parents must be incredibly proud, he continued, turning to Mom and Dad with genuine enthusiasm. Raising a daughter who becomes one of the most successful entrepreneurs in the region, that's quite an achievement. Mom's smile looked physically painful. Yes, we're very proud. But I could see the wheels turning behind her eyes. She was already trying to figure out how to reframe the evening's earlier conversations, how to explain to Mrs. Patterson and Dr. Williams why she'd been describing her billionaire daughter as unemployed and directionless. The crowd around us was growing, with people introducing themselves and asking questions about the technology center and job opportunities. I fielded them as best I could, but I kept one eye on my parents, who were clearly struggling to process this sudden shift in their understanding of my life. Victoria, Dad said during a brief lull in the conversation, can we talk privately for a minute? I followed him to a quieter corner of the room, with Mom trailing behind us like she was afraid we might disappear. I need to understand something, Dad said in his careful lawyer voice. When did this happen? When did you become this? It's been gradual, I said. I started the company right after college with some algorithms I developed for my thesis. We got our first major client about 6 years ago, and it grew from there. 6 years ago, Mom repeated faintly. You've been running a billion-dollar company for 6 years, and you never told us? It was a reasonable question, but the answer was complicated. How do you explain that you kept quiet? Because every time you tried to share good news, it was dismissed or minimized. How do you tell your parents that their constant suggestions for real jobs made it clear they'd never understand what you actually did for a living? I tried to tell you, I said carefully. Remember when I got the contract with Morrison Financial? I was excited about it, and I started to explain what it meant. But you said it sounded too good to be true, and I should focus on getting a stable job instead. Mom's face flushed. I was just trying to be realistic. I know, I said, and I meant it. But after a while, it became easier to just let you think what you wanted to think. The conversation was interrupted by Dr. Williams, who'd apparently connected some dots. Victoria, I have to ask, the Hayes Foundation that's been funding medical research at the university, is that? Yes, I confirmed. We'd established the foundation 3 years ago. Mom looked like she might faint. The Hayes Foundation? The one that donated $10 million to the Children's Hospital. Among other grants, yes. But that's been in the newspapers, Dad said slowly. Margaret, we've read about the Hayes Foundation. How did we not realize? Because Hayes is a common name, Mom said weakly, and we never thought. How could we have known that our Victoria was the same? It was painful to watch her realize how completely she'd misjudged the situation. For years, she'd been worrying about my future while I was quietly building something bigger than she'd ever imagined. The daughter she described as aimless and unsuccessful had been creating jobs, funding scholarships, and contributing millions to local causes. Ma'am? A young reporter had appeared at my elbow. I'm from the City Tribune. Could I ask you a few questions about the Technology Center project? Of course, I said, grateful for the distraction. As I answered questions about timelines and economic impact, I could see my parents hovering nearby, still looking shell-shocked. Mom kept glancing around the room like she was seeing it for the first time, probably remembering all the conversations where she'd apologized for my lack of direction. The evening wound down eventually, with business cards exchanged and promises made to follow up on various initiatives. As the crowd thinned out, my family found themselves alone with the shattered remains of their assumptions. Victoria, Mom said finally, her voice small. I owe you an apology. You don't need to. No, I do, she interrupted. I spent tonight telling everyone you were a failure. I've spent years telling everyone you were a failure. And all this time, you were. She gestured helplessly at the room where the mayor was still chatting with stragglers about the transformative impact of my donation. You were trying to protect me, I said gently. You wanted me to have security and stability. I understand that. But I was wrong, she said, tears starting to form in her eyes. I was so wrong about everything. Dad cleared his throat. Can I ask why you didn't correct us? Why you let us go on thinking? It was the question I had been dreading, because the answer revealed uncomfortable truths about our family dynamics. Because every time I tried to share something I was excited about, it got shot down, I said honestly. Every breakthrough, every success, every milestone, you found reasons why it wasn't real or sustainable or meaningful. After a while, I stopped trying. The words hung in the air between us like an indictment. I could see Mom remembering specific conversations, specific moments when she dismissed my enthusiasm as naive optimism. The Morrison contract, she said quietly. You tried to tell me it was a big deal, and I said it sounded like a scam. The patent office celebration, Dad added, looking stricken. You wanted us to come to some ceremony, and we said we were too busy. The Forbes interview, Mom whispered. You mentioned something about a magazine wanting to talk to you, and I said not to waste your time with publicity stunts. Each memory was like a small wound being reopened. These weren't malicious moments. They were loving parents trying to protect their daughter from disappointment and delusion. But the cumulative effect had been to create a wall between us, brick by brick, conversation by conversation. "I'm sorry," Mom said, and now the tears were flowing freely. "I'm so sorry, Victoria. I thought I was helping. I thought I was being realistic." "I know," I said, "and I did, but maybe now we can try something different." The country club staff were starting to clean up around us, stacking chairs and clearing tables. Dad's retirement party had officially ended, but something else was beginning. A new chapter in our family story, built on truth instead of assumptions. "So what happens now?" Dad asked. "Now you know who I really am," I said. "And if you're interested, I'd love to show you what I've been building." Mom nodded eagerly, mascara streaked, but eyes bright with genuine curiosity for the first time in years. "Can I ask one more question?" Dad said. "Of course. Are you happy? With all of this, with what you've built, are you happy?" It was such a dad question, cutting straight to the heart of what mattered, and it deserved an honest answer. "Yes," I said simply. "I love what I do. I love solving problems and building things and creating opportunities for other people. The money is nice, but it's not why I do it." "Good," he said, and smiled for the first time since the mayor's announcement. "That's all that really matters." As we gathered our things and prepared to leave, Mom slipped her arm through mine, a gesture she hadn't made since I was much younger. "Victoria," she said quietly, "would you like to have lunch this week? I'd love to hear about your work. Really hear about it, I mean." "I'd like that," I said. Walking out of the country club that night, I felt lighter than I had in years. The secret was out, the pretense was over, and for the first time in a long time, my family knew exactly who I was. It wasn't the ending I'd expected when the evening began, but it was the beginning I'd been hoping for all along.